Have you ever wanted to swing a sword, cast mighty fireballs into the legions of the enemies charging towards you and your friends? Or have you ever just wanted to sit around a table with friends, have a fun evening? Well, the good news is you can do all of these at once, playing tabletop RPGs. This is Tabletop RPG 101. Welcome to RPG 101. Today we're going to be discussing three of the most important things you'll need to play any tabletop RPG. Those three things are a set of dice, a set of the core rules, and a character sheet. Let's start with the dice. Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder use a set of polyhedral dice such as these, from the D4 all the way up to the D20. The D20 is the most important die in these game systems as it is the action dice. Rolls of this die determine the success or the failure of certain actions. When you roll this die and add in the relevant modifiers from your attacks or your skill checks, it determines whether or not those attacks hit or those skills succeed. The other dice are used to determine hit points in the various classes and damage from the various weapons. The two 10-sided dice are also used to roll percentiles. These dice here, when rolled, if they came up with a 70 and a 3, the result would be 73%. Other game systems, such as Worlds of Darkness and Shadowrun, also use polyhedral dice, but they tend to stick to one type. Worlds of Darkness runs on a 10-sided die pool method, and Shadowrun, at its current iteration, is currently running a 6-sided die pool. The next thing we're going to talk about are the core rules. For Dungeons & Dragons, the one you'll want to look at the most will be the player's handbook. Inside this are the complete set of rules for not only creating your character, but for equipping him with gear and selecting spells. This is your go-to reference if you ever have a question about gameplay, mechanics, or what to do next when you level. Now, for your first couple of games, it's perfectly alright to borrow it from a friend. These are pretty hefty investments if you're not sure you're going to play. Dungeons & Dragons Core Handbook goes for anywhere from $30 to $40, depending if you're going to get new or used. Pathfinder is about the same. I'm not sure what the latest edition of Worlds of Darkness is, but they usually run about $25 at least. So again, it's alright if you just want to borrow it from a friend if you're not sure if you're going to keep playing. The next thing we're going to look at, and the last one for today, is the character sheet. Now there's two basic ways to do a character sheet. The first one is using the pre-generated character sheets provided with the player's handbooks and at the publisher's websites. The second way is to use just a plain piece of regular notebook paper and a pencil. Now, there are benefits to using both. For example, using the regular paper, you can organize the information in a way that seems more intuitive and natural for you. It's easier for you to find because you know where you wrote it down. The downside to using notebook paper is as you gain more abilities and go higher in levels, especially for spellcasters, there is more information to keep track of, and it can tend to make your sheets very jumbled. In this case, I usually prefer to use a character sheet generated by the company. You wind up with a very organized set of information. It's set in blocks with like. All of your ability scores are together, all of your stats and the skills that relate to those stats are all together. Your weapon damages are all together. Your skills, your defenses, everything. It's all grouped together, and it's all very intuitive that if you're looking for your Constitution modifier, for example, you know it's going to be right next to your Constitution score. This character sheet here is a very good example of this, where it has your ability scores. It also goes straight through and shows the skills that relate to that ability. I really like this because it doesn't make me have to keep jumping back and forth to figure out which skill goes with which ability and what the bonus is. They're right there. For strength, this is all the stuff that relates to strength. This is what your modifier is. Then you go down dexterity and constitution, etc., etc., etc. It's all right next to each other. I really like this. Now, the downside to these character sheets are space is very limited because you have so many things crammed onto a single 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. So, especially when you get down to the spell lists, it's very tiny lines, very cramped space, and you usually wind up using an additional piece of paper for your spells anyway. The only real benefit to using these, if you have really big handwriting or really sprawling handwriting, is that it's easy for dungeon masters and other players to read the basic and very important things. Spell lists, it's not really important that you have what it does and the damage on the character sheet. You just have to list the name of the spells and how many times a day you can cast. So there you have it. The basic items you'll need to start playing tabletop role-playing games such as Dungeons & Dragons or Pathfinder. Join us next time when we actually start going through the steps to build your first character, starting with choosing a race. That's it for RPG 101. Thanks, and safe travels.